My name is Dr. Roberto Rivera. I came in from Chicago, and the young people that I had the privilege of working with there, they call me Big Bro. So for all my young people, you see me walking down the hall or something, you can just holla at me, say, "What's up, Big Bro?" Let's practice that on the count of three. One, two, three. I want you to say, "What's up, Big Bro?" One, two, three. What's up? I'm here in Sacramento. I see some beautiful faces of people that I know. I see some new faces of people that I don't know. Looking forward to connecting with y'all. Okay, so the title of my talk is entitled Creating Ecosystems of Thriving and Healing in Tumultuous Times. How many of us know that we are living in some tumultuous times globally and nationally right now? So, globally, obviously, we're dealing with conflict, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, but we are in some serious times here nationally. And we've been here for a minute. How many of us know there was a lot of people who lost their lives during COVID-19? 1.3 million. I did a little research and I realized that's more American lives lost than Americans lost in all wars America's ever participated in. That's the American War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq put together. That's a significant amount of life lost. And we know that a disproportionate amount of those lives were folks of color. Due to our social determinants of health, due to systemic inequity like racism, chronic stress, our Latino familia, we were 5 times more likely to be in these essential worker positions. Anybody can relate having family members who are working, cleaning, hospitals, or the like during COVID before the vaccine? I remember feeling that fear for my family going to work every day. Or my black brothers and sisters and siblings who constitute 13% of the population, yet 34% of all death during COVID. Or our Navajo brothers, sisters, and siblings were hit the hardest per capita than any other demographic. How many of us know grief is still persisting in America today? And the former Surgeon General said, mental health is the public crisis of our time. And this is the case not just in the US, but all over the world. The World Health Organization put out a report recently suggesting that 70% of folks around the world who need mental health support are unable to get it. In addition to that, if that were not enough, we have to also contend with federal ICE agents who are now raiding our cities like Chicago and LA. Y'all been hearing about this, seeing about this? I received an email from one of my former students in Chicago just a few days ago who was on his way to work. And then the helicopter showed up, they blocked the streets, they ripped him out of the car, and they were tear gassing folks. How many of us know there is some trauma in the village happening right now? And so there's a scholar named Dr. Lawrence Gross. He studied different things like the Black Plague in Europe and genocide in North America. And he came up with this term, post-apocalyptic stress syndrome. He says a society can experience a shock so strong that it changes the very nature of society itself. He goes on to say that there can be such a traumatic impact on folks that it has an epigenetic impact on people's DNA so that they exhibit post-traumatic stress. And this DNA impact can allow for further generations like our children and grandchildren to also exhibit post-traumatic stress. He says if America doesn't do something soon to metabolize this stress and this trauma and this grief, he said we're headed towards post-apocalyptic stress syndrome. Now, I know I'm sharing a lot of information with y'all, and I just want to be clear, I'm not here to give you a message of death and despair today. My message is about hope and life, and I hope you can breathe that in. Because the master narrative would tell us that we are destined to suffer and survive and be in this post-traumatic stress, but there is another way forward, familia. And that is the path of the counter narrative, which is what we're going to discuss today. A path of healing, a path of thriving, a path where the setback is a setup for a comeback. And I'm going to invoke this term, post-traumatic growth. Raise your hand if you know the term resilience. So resilience is you have a setback and you come back to baseline. Post-traumatic growth is when the pain becomes a propane and you have even greater amounts of empowerment and clarity of purpose and better relationships than when the traumatic event first happened. And so what I believe with all of my being is that we are in a slingshot moment right now where it seems like we're going back to the 1950s or something, I don't know when, but we are about to propel forward with an unprecedented amount of collective connection and collective consciousness being awakened around the nation. And I believe our young people are going to help to lead us there. Let's give it up for the young folks who are here this morning. And so I have just a few points I want to make with this talk this morning. One is I want to encourage us to break barriers on 3 levels. I want to encourage us to break barriers first within ourselves. I want us to feel empowered and to have permission that we can start to lean into our own wellness and well-being and to start doing these things in culturally grounded ways. How many of us know that right now being healthy, whole, and well is an act of transformative resistance? Secondly, I want to encourage us in breaking barriers in our own organizations. I want to encourage us to start building these beloved communities where our departments and our programs and our different efforts start to align around well-being. I want to encourage us to also break the barriers so that we can start to partner in more authentic ways with other agencies and build this ecosystem of healing and thriving. Finally, I want us to start to break these barriers in how we think about power and start to learn that we can share this power with our young people, with our communities, if we want to lean into this transformative work of not just building another ecosystem, but building an ecosystem of healing and thriving. And so I want to just be clear and transparent. I come into this space as a former young person that I had adults and mentors like Kia who believed in me and saw me and celebrated me. This is a picture of me in the front center there when I was a teenager. And someone believed in me enough to make me a program director of a teen center when I was a teen. And folks would come into the teen center and they say, yes, I'd like to talk to who's in charge. And I'd be like, I'm in charge. And this was a transformative experience for me because prior to this, I went to 13 different schools before high school. I went through drug rehab. I had conflicts with the law. And to me, this kind of space was a healing space. It detoxified that poisonous ideology that I was starting to believe about myself. And so this journey has been a long journey, and I'm going to keep it short. But I started this journey by realizing I had gifts that I could use for good. And I started a legitimate hustle. How many of us know it's important for young people who have that gifting to use that gifting for a legitimate reason? And so I started a hip-hop line of clothing. In the Midwest, I started sponsoring MCs and DJs and breakers and graffiti writers who were rocking my t-shirts and hoodies and fleeces, and we even did skateboards. And I remember I got invited down to a teen center. And when I went in, it was like a scene out of a movie. I remember there's graffiti on the wall. There was kids who were breakdancing. And I remember I heard some music down the hallway. And I'm like, what's going on over here? So I go down the hallway, and all these kids are in this cypher. They're in this circle, and they're rapping. And I'm like, okay, and they're getting down, telling their stories. And I'm a teen too. And so I wait for my minute. I'm like, yo, yo soy originalmente de Nicaragua. Yo vengo con combinación de fuego y agua. I be hot like lava, muy caliente. represente la vida buena con toda mi gente, usando toda mi mente y corazón cuando estoy hablando, nunca jugando. Nadie está listo por lo que estamos preparando en este año 2025. Yo, I put my fist saying power to the people, coming together like feathers of an eagle, knowing the good will overcome evil. That's how we drop it here in the area. Drop a freestyle even during breaking barriers. Yo, about to come spit the truth. Once again, I gotta big up all the youth. You know, I couldn't let my sister Kia down. She said I might drop bars. I was like, yeah, maybe. So we started building relationships. And I started bringing the people I was sponsoring to come mentor the youth. And we started doing workshops, which led to concerts, which led to festivals, which led, coming back to this photo, to original hip hop theatrical productions like Hamilton. I think Lin-Manuel Miranda might owe me some money, man. We were doing this like 20 years. I'm gonna get this money. I'm gonna pay these people who've been furloughed. I mean, if the government can't save us, we gotta save us, right? That's a whole nother workshop. We're gonna talk about that later. So we were in this transformative space. Look, it's multiracial, it's intergenerational. This was a beloved community. This is a space that healed me. Bell Hooks defines beloved community as formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation. By each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. It's about unity and diversity. It's about looking out for one another, making sure one another's needs are being met in culturally grounded ways. It's about allowing people to become self-actualized. In hip hop, we give each other hip hop names. That means that we have a superhero name. Everybody should have a superhero name, right? And so this space was so transformative for me that I realized, you know what? I don't want to just keep this transformation here. I need to start exploring things. Our young people were opening up for international acts, speaking at conferences with Congress people. And how many of us know mentorship is reciprocally transformative? And we, as the older adolescents and young adults, were also being transformed. I had been told I was LD, learning deficient, and it was in this transformative space I realized maybe I'm not LD, learning deficient, maybe I'm LD, I learned differently. Young folks, say this with me. Say, you are not learning deficient. Say, you just learned differently. Let's flip it. Say, I am not learning deficient. Say, I just learned differently. And so I started to have a spark of curiosity that maybe school wasn't the most painful thing in the whole universe. And maybe I could have a different experience in community college. So I went to community college and I started in all remedial classes. And my goal was not to get good grades. My goal was to gain knowledge to help me better serve my youth and my community. And so eventually I went to a sociology class. We had to write a research paper. Everybody probably spent 5 hours writing the research paper. I spent 25 hours. And then I went and created workshops and songs and plays. And this really weird thing happened. As I was making that connection between theory and practice, I started getting all A's in all of my classes. And so eventually I graduated from community college and I kept going, so I matriculated to a 4-year university at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which had the #1 school of education with Gloria Lansing Billings. And I created my own major called Social Change, Youth Culture, and the Arts, because I realized school didn't need to be done to me, but I could have agency and formulate my educational experience. And then I kept connecting theory and practice, theory and practice. And a couple years ago, I walked across the stage and they hooded me and they said, "You are now Dr. Roberto Rivera." And so along that journey, I could see that our work, although it was transformative, that we needed to de-silo our work because our babies were being soul murdered during school, like Dr. Bettina Love talks about. And so even though we were doing this stuff in out of school time that I thought was very transformative, we needed to build bridges, just like Sister Bees was helping us to understand, right? And so we decided to innovate, and we probably created one of the first culturally relevant social and emotional learning curricula in the country. And so for us, crisis was a precursor for opportunity. And so the superintendent said, you can go into this school. This is our worst school. He used that language. And we met with the principals, and they said, you can work with these students. They're the worst. And they had every label under the sun, EBD, ODD, ADHD, XYZ. Maybe some of them were down with OPP too. I don't know. But our orientation was not prevention or intervention. Our orientation was invention. We wanted to have these young people experience themselves in a new way. So we didn't treat them like objects to be changed. We treated them like agents of change. We didn't ask, are you smart? We asked, how are you smart? We helped them to find their community cultural wealth, to think critically about issues going on in their community, to leverage these assets and solving these different problems that they cared about. And a really weird thing happened. We started seeing some data, and we live in a world where it seems like if you don't have any data, it seems like what you're doing doesn't even matter. And so we started seeing GPAs going up a full point in 10 weeks. We started seeing attendance going up 41% in 30 days. We started equipping educators and even cafeteria workers, because how many of us know every single person in a school or an ecosystem counts? Working in alternative schools where kids had been part of the juvenile justice detention center. Anybody work in that space? And so in this school, you had to be kicked out of 2 other schools to be invited in. And they had their first ever 100% graduation rate. And then I got my fellowship at CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And we started publishing articles on culturally relevant and critically conscious social emotional learning. I started seeing the whole field internationally, and I started picking up on a pattern that we were also seeing. No one knew how to sustain their work beyond 7 years. Young people would graduate, there'd be attrition, and nobody knew how to create the conditions of sustainability. I'm wondering if anybody can relate to this. Has anyone ever been a part of something that was transformative or maybe fulfilling? Maybe you got a promotion and you left that school or that department. You went on up to the east side. Uh, sorry. And you come back only to see that that work is not being sustained. And so I started to develop a hunger and a fire inside of me. And that hunger and fire was wondering, where in the world are historically marginalized youth? Where are they thriving in a holistic way? And where are these ecosystems being sustained over 20 years? So I went through the literature, trauma-informed care, healing-centered education, culturally relevant, responsive, sustaining pedagogy, critical pedagogy, youth development, social justice youth development, education, leadership. And how many of us know you can have some wonderful case studies and beautiful books, but then when you follow up, these things aren't always being sustained. And I remember I had a conversation with Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. He told me he had been to thousands of schools around the world, and he only knew of one school that met our criteria that was still in existence. And so by triangulating the data, we found 4 different ecosystems. Kiaroa in Auckland, New Zealand. Naka, Native American Community Academy in Albuquerque. Kanuo Ka'aina out of Waimea, Hawaii. And Heal the Hood out of Cape Town, South Africa. NGO. Interesting enough, all the ecosystems were run by First Nations people. They weren't calling what they were doing community schools or SEL or MTSS or any of this jargon that we use in the West. They were doing something much more robust, much more ancient, something that was allowing them to exhibit some of the most advanced levels of SEL community schools I'd ever seen and been able to sustain it for 30 plus years. And this was a paradigm and process that we co-authored and co-created called critical well-being. Somebody say critical well-being. So critical well-being has 3 tenets. This was consistent across all the sites. is they built a cultura de amor, a culture of aloha, a culture of love, a beloved community that affirmed people in their identities, supported them in their critical consciousness, supported them in walking in their purpose. They also institutionalized and centralized well-being, looking after the well-being of the staff, the students, and the community, and meeting these needs in culturally relevant ways. And not just creating the conditions for the flourishing of humans, but even our non-human kin. And finally, they discussed and practiced the importance of authentic voice with the youth and the community, driving decision-making around policies and practices and even the distribution of resources. Now, I know a lot of these ideas take different language and different forms. We have ecosystems of care, we have whole child development, youth voice. Raise your hand if you know some of these ideas are indeed transformative. So this is nothing new. And in the spirit of Galileo, he once said, I'm not here to teach you anything. He says, I'm here to inspire you to remember what you know to be true and encourage you to act on that. And familia, isn't it true? That if not now, when? Now is the time where we need to act on the things that we know are transformative. So my hope, my goal with this keynote is to give you a little gas, a little fuel, a little inspiration to act on those things that you already know to be true. Now, if you want to go a little higher with me, say higher. A little deeper with me, say deeper. So I'm going to give you a few case studies here to help you actualize this information and make it practical, give you a little tools along the way. Before I go into Kanu o Ka'aina, one of my elders once taught me, in order to understand what something is, sometimes you have to understand what it's not. And so before I go into this school's model, I want to share what our elder, Terry Cross from Seneca Nation, explained to us. He said, you have to understand that colonization has been perfected over centuries. It's been scaled around the world, from South Africa to Australia to all over Africa to the United States. And he says it has been perfected where they can have intergenerational oppression over folks. And it always follows these 5 steps. First, you occupy the land. You come, you settle the land. And then you take over the resources. You control the food and the water. After that, you ignore the sovereignty. That means that the indigenous leadership no longer has a voice or a say in what happens. Then you create systems and ways of being that make the indigenous folks feel like their culture is full of deficits and that their ceremonies are demonized. And the final blow to ensure intergenerational oppression is that you take the children. And historically, we know that the children of our First Nations folks were oftentimes taken from their families as young as 3 years old. And so public education in this country has a history of being weaponized against Native populations. And the whole philosophy was to kill the Indian and to save the person. A lot of young folks experience what Dr. Angela Valenzuela calls subtractive schooling, where in order for them to have a chance of doing well academically, they had to divorce themselves from their cultural, racial, and ethnic identities. And if these young people were caught practicing these ceremonies or their cultural traditions, they were beaten, and sometimes worse. There was a report that came out recently that indicated in Canada, they found 700 children's bodies in unmarked graves. Now, we talk about Halloween and horror stories. This is probably the most premier American horror story you could ever imagine. And so, beyond that, if you did survive, many of these young folks have been brainwashed, so they didn't want to go back home. They didn't want to reconnect with their familia. And so Kanu o Ka'aina came in to bring the counter narrative. Somebody say the counter narrative. And the counter narrative was they wanted to create a decolonizing, humanizing, and indigenizing space. Somebody say indigenizing. And so they started by asking the sovereignty and asking the leadership, what constitutes success? And the community said, we want young folks to feel good about themselves. connected to their language. We want them to be taken care of. We want them to have a responsibility to the land and also a high level of academic rigor. So this got infused in the pedagogy, the mission, the vision, the policies, the metrics, all the way down to the rubrics in which every lesson is formulated. They use this term of pedagogy of aloha. Somebody say aloha, which means radical or unconditional love. So they center this whole philosophy on relationships and relevance and responsibility. How many of us know these are important things to integrate in our engagement with folks? And with the understanding, the young folks can do rigorous work and still have fun. How many of us know young people like to have fun? We saw them having fun up here, didn't we? We need to help us elders and yelders have more fun too. And so I asked for an example about pedagogy of aloha, and Auntie Ku said, you know, I have a lot of stories. Let me share this one. And this is a story about these young folks who decided that they were going to connect some science to what they were observing in their neighborhood and in their community. So a lot of them had been fishing, and they realized that the population of fish had been dwindling. And some of the fish that they were catching seemed to be sick. And so the young people started to hypothesize that something was wrong with the river. And so these young folks ended up taking photos and field notes and trying to document what was happening with this river. And once they exhausted all their data collection techniques, they partnered with the University of Hawaii at Hilo with scientists who had more rigorous scientific instruments who came in and also affirmed, doing the test, that there was toxicity in the river. And they went further up the river and found the river was more and more toxic. Until eventually they got to way up the river, they could see a manufacturing plant that visibly was dumping toxic waste into the river. So the youth, taking their photos and taking the research, working with the scientists, were able to share this research with legislators, who then changed policy and enforced stark fines on the manufacturing plants and got them to stop dumping toxic waste in the river. And as a result, they were able to revitalize the ecosystem. The fish came back, the turtles came back. And so I asked Annie Ku, I said, what happened with these young people after this experience? She said, well, they won national awards for science, and many of these young people became scientists because they realized that the highest level of academic rigor is moving towards social justice and taking care of your community. And so I'm curious, with this quick case study, do you see any evidence of there being a culture of love? Any evidence of these young people being affirmed in their identities, walking in their purpose? Do you see any evidence of there being a focus on well-being for the human and non-human kin? Do you see any evidence of authentic participation? Raise your hand if you see any evidence in this case. So quick question. I'm curious to know, where do you see the toxicity of the colonial project still persisting in your system or more broadly in society today? So I want to encourage you to turn to somebody next to you, and we're not going into a breakout room on Zoom. We're going to actually have a one-on-one conversation. I know it's a little unusual still. So let's have a little conversation. Where do you see the colonial project still persisting? Let's go. Anybody just want to shout out, where do you see the colonial project persisting today? Yes, our young people are the first to go. Shout it out. Let's give it up for this young person right here. Right? We still have resources that are being controlled by those in dominant power, that are not being equitably distributed. We still have systems that are dehumanizing our people, that are inhibiting them from meeting their legitimate holistic needs. Yes?
Even as Native American people, some people think that we still don't exist because the way our education is taught within these systems as well. So yeah, we see it in school every day.
Mm-hmm. See it in school every day. Let's give it up. One more. Anyone else? Where do you see some of the toxicity of the colonial project persisting?
I see it pretty much everywhere. I work with young people, and to use your example of the fish in the river, in real life, We blame and medicate the fish.
That's right.
We don't fix the water. We don't go upriver. We blame and medicate the fish. We blame the
Right.
fish
That's
instead
right.
of figuring out its ecology. And I
Right.
think that's where I see it every day.
That's the message right there. Let's give it up. Let's give it up. So that's a perfect segue, because how many of us know sometimes elders will share stories with us, and there can be some layers to the stories. And so when Auntie Koo shared this story with me, I realized it's not just a profound story of culturally sustaining pedagogy, that this was a story that could help us strategically understand how to detoxify our systems and create the conditions for healing and thriving. So, exactly what you were saying. Oftentimes, we see sick fish and we blame the fish. And we don't even look at the fish in a holistic way. From a Western standpoint, we have mental health professionals over here. We have emotional behavioral professionals over there. We have physical health professionals over here. Spiritual health, if they're even in the room, way over there. No one's talking to each other. So from an indigenous perspective, well-being has a holistic paradigm, that you're looking at personal well-being, including the mind, the body, the heart, and the spirit. The goal here is to establish balance and harmony between the four different quadrants. How many of us know, anecdotally, sometimes if you ever have a conflict with a loved one in the morning, that impacts your body, right? Maybe your stomach is all twisted up. Maybe you're trying to make a decision at work about something and you're kind of foggy about these decisions. These domains impact all of the domains. And so it's important when we're looking at personal well-being that we take a holistic view and that we do this work intentionally. Again, our elder Terry Cross says culture is one group or people's preferred way of meeting their basic human needs. So I want to just share with you a tool that we've used in some of our work here at the Sacramento County Office of Education. This is called the PIES check-in. Someone say the PIES check-in. Oftentimes we'll see someone that we work with and we'll say, "How are you doing?" And what's their response? So this is a tool that we use to go a little deeper, to build a little bit more intentional relationship. So PIES, how are you doing physically? Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping enough? Are you getting exercise? Intellectually, are you stimulating your brain with critical conversations? Are you learning something new through a book or a podcast or a docuseries? How are you doing emotionally? Are you in tune with your emotions? Are you able to regulate them? Are you able to build relationships and sustain these relationships? Spiritually, are you connected to something larger than yourself? Do you have a sense of meaning and purpose in your life? And so what I want to do real quick is just invite us to do a PIES check-in with one another. I'm going to give you 90 seconds for each person to have a turn. In total, we're going to have about 3 minutes, okay? So turn to somebody new, and let's do a PIES check-in. To your point earlier, oftentimes, if we see the fish are sick, we blame the fish. Sometimes we even punish the fish. And we don't even look at the conditions of what's happening in the river or other systems that are impacting the river. And from an indigenous standpoint, you cannot divorce personal well-being from communal well-being or organizational well-being. These things are inextricably connected. And so we know through the research that if you're in an environment where you're breathing in toxins, we know that this can make you physically unhealthy. In the same way, if you're in an environment where you feel alienated, or you feel like you're angry all the time, or you're anxious all the time, this can have an adverse impact in your health. Research coming out of Harvard University takes it further and says if you're a person of color in a racially hostile environment, that can have an adverse impact psychologically and also physically. How many of us have seen and heard this research before? And so when we look at what's happening currently in this nation, we have to name it. And the reality is when we have ICE agents coming into our hospitals and snatching people up and arresting people. This is one of my former students, Jesse Fuentes, alderman in Chicago, who was arrested simply by asking ICE agents if they had a warrant to come into the community hospital. She was released, but she's a citizen and a publicly elected official exercising her constitutional right. And I know here in California, Alberto Carabajo has taken a similar stance, saying, no, we can't have this craziness coming into our schools. And so what is happening is that we're finding ourselves in a toxic environment that's causing racial trauma, which can be defined as the cumulative traumatizing impact of racism on a racialized individual, which can include both interpersonal and systemic forms of racial discrimination, and typically includes historical, cultural, and community trauma as well. We know this is happening, and it's having an adverse impact on people now, and if we don't do something about it, it could also have an adverse impact in generations to come. But again, it is possible to get to the source of where the toxic waste is coming from and to eradicate these problems and revitalize our ecosystems. Who believes this? And so my final story that I want to share with y'all to let you know that this is real and this can happen is looking at Kiaroha and the warrior scholars there. The community wanted the youth not just to have a responsibility, but to be equipped to be change agents and what they call warrior scholars. So in high school, young people are trained to do original research. They do youth participatory action research. And so these young people became privy to the reality of there being adverse health outcomes among their people. And they started connecting the racial trauma literature to what they saw happening every day. They interviewed 40 people in their community, transcribed, coded, analyzed, and connected this data to the research. And then these young people shared their findings with the Ministry of Education and with other legislators in New Zealand, or Aotearoa as they call it. I don't have time to play this video, but check out this QR code to this keynote. This is truly probably the most powerful keynote I have ever seen anyone ever give. And they are speaking truth to power, to the Ministry of Education, and it is so compelling and so rigorous at the same time. So these young people were able to impact public policy because they said, look, this is at the root of all of our adverse health outcomes, is what they call the bomb of colonization. And they said that Kiaroa was creating a healing space. And so they asked and they demanded for more healing spaces that were culturally sustaining to be the case throughout the nation. And so they changed public policy and mandated and had resources. How many of us know the resource piece is important? So that culturally sustaining training was available to all the schools throughout Aotearoa. And so they were able to change the ecosystem. Perlinsky talks about the relationship between power, oppression, well-being, and justice. He says oppression happens when those in power create the conditions that inhibit people who are marginalized from reaching their holistic needs. Justice happens is when those who are marginalized regain the power to recalibrate the system to meeting their needs in culturally relevant ways. And he says that well-being and justice are inextricably connected. I love this quote. Justice, broadly conceived, is a critical determinant of well-being. Without justice, well-being is unattainable. And so I'm curious, what do you think about us prioritizing well-being as the North Star of our work? And what if our major focus was building collective power, especially in our young people, to use data to transform public policy? How many of us think that could be transformative? Again, we've co-created a platform that allows young people and staff members and community members to formulate and to co-create their own data around well-being. And also there's resources here where you can help them use that data to influence and transform policy and practice. And we are going to make this available to you all for free to try this out. So please grab that QR code. All right, so I'm told that I'm out of time here, so I'm rushing here a little bit. So we're going to wrap this up. How do we create ecosystems of thriving and healing during tumultuous times? I'm going to wrap this up with a story that my mentor, Sean Jinwright, shared with me. of a botanist friend. He said that his botanist friend was doing some tests on plants. They put them in these airtight containers, they dispersed toxins, and the plants died. And then they took more plants, and they put them in these airtight containers and dispersed these toxins, and what do you think happened to the plants? They all died. I don't know how they get money for research. This is crazy. And then somebody, I don't know what kind of plant he was smoking, was like, man, what if we arrange the plants so they touch leaves, dude? So they arranged the plants so they touch leaves. They dispersed the toxins, and something surprising happened. The plants detoxified the environment and created a thriving community. So what do you think this has to do with our message today? Connection. We have to connect with ourselves and our own well-being. We have to connect with one another in our own organizations. We need all the departments and programs talking to each other. We need to connect across agencies and touch leaves and build this ecosystem. And we have to touch leaves with our young people in our communities in authentic ways. And if we can do that, I believe we can detoxify this environment and bear the fruit of thriving that has a chance of persisting for generations. This is the opportunity before us for us to stand together, to stand against this ecosystem and survival dominant theory, and to stand together towards thriving and building an ecosystem of healing and thriving. I want to thank you all so much for your time together. Let's stay connected.